The question of whether Britain could survive a nuclear war is a pressing concern as nuclear weapons become a looming threat once again. The UK's military experts explore how the country might weather the fallout of a nuclear conflict, from the government's survival plans during the Cold War to the realities of hydrogen bombs that can wipe out entire cities. The UK is one of the few countries not to make it through nuclear war due to its significant role in shaping the current nuclear-powered world and signing a nuclear non-proliferation treaty. As one of the economic and military giants in the world, the UK is no stranger to nuclear preparedness. The country currently has an estimated arsenal of 225 nuclear warheads, with the capability to hit vital targets up to 7,500 miles away with some of them. However, what is perhaps more important than the present state of Britain's nuclear arsenal is the country's history in nuclear research, testing, and importance during the Cold War. The Manhattan Project, widely considered the first successful project to develop a nuclear weapon, relies on nuclear fission, where isotopes of uranium and plutonium are compressed until they are forced to undergo fission, breaking up into smaller, more stable elements. The consequences of the atomic bomb were seen firsthand by the bombings of the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which killed between 150,000 and 250,000 people, effectively forcing Japan to capitulate from World War II. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill retorted that the atom bombs did not seem unmanageable as the instrument of war. This came from the fact that the UK was one of the bigger contributors to the US nuclear weapons program during the Manhattan Project. The alliance between the US and the UK didn't last long after World War II ended. In 1946, a series of spy scandals, some involving British officials, deteriorated the relationship between the two countries, although they remained allies. President Harry Truman signed the Atomic Energy Act of 1946, cutting off British scientists and anyone who didn't have proper security clearances, and was approved by the Atomic Energy Commission. This led to the UK pursuing independent efforts to create their nuclear arsenal and possibly improve on the designs of the atomic bombs created during World War II. One of the developments was the potential for upgrading the fission bomb to utilize a different power source to further increase its energy output. The first hydrogen bomb tests were conducted by the United States at Bikini Atoll as part of Operation Ivy, with the explosion nicknamed Mike Shot. The initial test used cryogenic deuterium and was too heavy to transport effectively on a plane, making it unsuitable as a deployable bomb. However, the explosion was rated to have the power of 10.4 megatons of TNT. For comparison, the Hiroshima detonation released roughly 0.016 megatons of TNT, which was on an entirely different scale. The next iteration of the hydrogen bomb, codenamed Operation Castle, was far deadlier than the previous iterations and testing predicted. The British soon understood the implications of the Castle Bravo testing, which overshot energy release expectations and caused dozens of deaths and significant fallout exposure to the surrounding islands. This was important because of the extensive nuclear war preparation that the British invested in during the Cold War. The first British theories for what might happen to the islands in case of a nuclear attack from the Soviets or another nuclear holding enemy were developed in 1953, stating possible contingencies for traditional atomic bombs. The plan simulated a worst-case scenario of the islands being bombed with roughly 200 nuclear warheads, spread evenly across major industrial and population centers, airbases, and vital military compounds. After the reality of what a hydrogen bomb could do set in, a study of the potential of only 10 such warheads being dropped on Britain revealed far more devastating results. Called the Strath Report, the study conceded that the attack would have a death toll of roughly 12 million initially, roughly 9 times as much as the forecast for an attack of 200 atomic bombs. The decimation caused by the 10 blasts was predicted to shut off half of the country's economy, industry, and logistics capabilities. The rest of the country's food and water sources were likely to be polluted with radiation, leaving the survivors in siege conditions. As countries with access to nuclear weapons advanced their capabilities, it was getting more likely that Britain wouldn't be bombed by only 10 hydrogen bombs. but by dozens or even hundreds of them at the height of nuclear armament in the late 1970s. Most governments subconsciously knew that the effort of surviving a nuclear war fought with hydrogen bombs would effectively be futile. However, that didn't stop them from preparing for the better case scenarios, ones previously considered among the worst cases of 200 atom bombs being dropped on the UK alone. The UCMO was established in 1957 to facilitate collaboration between the Royal Observer Corps, ROC, government reporting systems, and the Meteorological Office. This would enable the British government to create an accurate forecast of radioactive fallout and its trajectory across the British Isles. The ROC was designed as a reporting unit to provide detailed reports of the extent of damage done to the country. The organisation had to be designed to survive the initial blast itself, using the worst-case scenario from 1953 as the basis for planning and organising the shelters that ROC would use as the basis of operation. The ROC was provided with 1,563 Royal Observer Corps posts, which were reinforced underground nuclear shelters with above-ground radiation and blast detectors. Each post could house 3 people, food storage, tools that would interface with the detectors above the shelter, and communication interfaces with Rockburg headquarters and other government institutions. In the event of an incoming nuclear attack, the ROC post would be manned by 3 people, one of whom would need to check on the above-ground detector equipment. The person checking the detection equipment would also be trained to perform all this blindfolded to reduce the risk of exposure to radiation. The ROC personnel would then remain underground, using the tools in the room to log fallout levels on each day and report to its group headquarters. There were 31 such headquarters scattered across the country, each housed in a similar nuclear shelter. The headquarters then reported the data to the UCMO, which would have supplied enough information to create a forecast for fallout and radiation levels across the country. The forecast would be broadcast through available radio frequencies to all survivors, allowing British citizens to get a more accurate image of what awaited them when they left. As part of the plans to reform the ROC, the British government also enacted plans to protect itself against nuclear attacks. The Central Government War Headquarters, designed to survive bombs created during and immediately after World War II, could sustain 4,000 occupants for 3 months. The War Headquarters was designed to provide vital support for the remaining military forces above ground, compile reports from the UCMO, and issue directives and assistance to the general population. However, the Central Government War Headquarters was never fully tested for its efficiency and survivability. The 1952 British White Paper introduced the broken-backed war theory, which posited that atomic bombs would decimate the economic and military potential of all participating nations or coalitions. This theory suggested that countries would scramble to annihilate opposing sides using only available military personnel, vehicles, and equipment. The winner would be the country or coalition that could eliminate the remainder of the opposing military and destroy the leftover governments in hiding. However, some strategists suggested that this notion was impractical and impossible to predict. The War Headquarters was not built to attempt to restructure the British country in the event of total nuclear annihilation. The Strath Report, published in the same year as the Bunker Bean Commission, outlined the far more likely scenario outlined by the Strath Report. The Soviets easily surpassed the 15 megaton yield of the test with the detonation of the Tsar bomber in 1961, yielding 50 to 58 megatons of TNT. This meant that the Soviets could outmatch even the prepositions of the Strath Report, given enough time to manufacture more weapons like the Tsar bomber and convert them into usable weapons. Further advancements of the Tsar bomber proposed the potential 100 to 150 megaton bomb that could be used in space. As a result, the Central Government War Headquarters was effectively made redundant before it was even commissioned. Its purpose was to give the British government officials a false sense of security that the country could survive nuclear warfare. In reality, the country would likely never experience prolonged atomic warfare. The more advanced hydrogen bombs could be dropped in a matter of hours, leaving the survivors largely left to their own devices. In the rare event that the headquarters managed to survive the initial onslaught, it wasn't clear whether the government could reassert itself from a central position and recover the entirety of the UK territory. The second half of the 1950s saw an improvement of the plan, proposing dividing the UK governance into regional centres. The first iteration involved 13 regions with centres of local government typically designed around larger bunkers or military or national defence infrastructure away from population centres. The plan was reorganised in the 1970s by expanding the number of regions to 17, now including larger prisons as potential seats of local government. The Protect and Survive initiative was created in 1980 to provide detailed plans for home-built fallout and survival rooms, highlighting the need for equipment and resources for prolonged survival without going outside. It also included descriptions of the dangers of fallout and the necessity of retaining communication channels after an attack. The initiative proposed that the UKMO would maintain a system of radio towers across Britain, focused on distributing a single radio frequency, the Wartime Broadcasting Service. The service would broadcast once an hour every hour, with early broadcasts following the format found in the pamphlet. If the ROC and UKMO could collate a meaningful forecast of the fallout distribution, the service would diversify its broadcasts. The initiative was intended to be distributed as pamphlets or broadcast over all major TV and radio channels on repeat at a time when the threat of nuclear war would be days away. However, due to the uncertainty of its short-term effectiveness and massive public interest, the government published the content in 1980. A 1980 military exercise called Square Leg estimated that the mortality rate of the general population could reach 65%, meaning that only 35% of the population would survive the initial blast and serious radiation injuries. Even then, it was postulated that the remaining population would be forced to live on fallout-infested lands. Despite being unlikely to remain standing in the event of large-scale nuclear warfare, there is still some hope. All countries with nuclear arsenals are in the Northern Hemisphere, and due to a series of defensive agreements, Russia, China, or NATO launching nuclear missiles would likely cause a series of counterattacks directed to territories primarily in the Northern Hemisphere. Putin's saber-rattling of Russia's nuclear arsenal has left the public's consciousness after years of irrelevancy. Studies in 2022 suggest that people who don't die as immediate casualties of the blast will be left to fend for themselves in a nuclear winter, with temperatures dropping by as much as 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Roughly 5 billion people could starve to death, reducing the global population by more than half alone. The war in Ukraine is still ongoing, and it's up to global superpowers to realize that there won't be a winner in a nuclear war, only losers scrabbling for survival.